The message appeared in our family group chat at 7:43 p.m. on a Saturday evening, while I was reviewing quarterly reports from my marketing consultancy. The notification chimed cheerfully on my phone, completely at odds with the devastating blow that awaited me when I opened it. "Hey everyone, just a heads up about tomorrow's barbecue. Margaret, don't come. I'm sure you'll just ruin the whole party anyway. Thanks for understanding. Derek Thompson, my son-in-law of 2 years, had just publicly disinvited me from my own daughter's family gathering. But what made my chest tighten with humiliation wasn't just his casual cruelty. It was watching the likes roll in one by one. Amanda Robert Thompson, Derek's father. Linda Thompson, Derek's mother. My own daughter had liked her husband's message dismissing me as a party-ruining inconvenience. I stared at my phone for several minutes, watching those little heart and laughing emojis burn into my retina like brands. 29 years of raising Amanda as a single mother after her father died. 29 years of being her biggest supporter, her confidant, her cheerleader through every milestone and heartbreak. And now she was publicly endorsing her husband's assessment that my presence would ruin their family gathering. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Explanations about how I'd never done anything to ruin their events. Reminders of all the times I'd helped them financially when Derek's car sales weren't covering their mortgage. Questions about when I'd become such a burden that my own family preferred I stay away. Instead, I wrote 4 words. Understood. Enjoy your barbecue. But as I set my phone aside and returned to my laptop, a different kind of understanding was crystallizing in my mind. Derek Thompson had just made a critical error in judgment, not because he'd hurt my feelings, though he certainly had, but because he'd severely underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. You see, Derek had no idea that 6 months ago, I'd quietly acquired the failing automotive dealership where he worked. Thompson Auto Group had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years, and the previous owner had been desperate to sell before declaring bankruptcy. My holding company, Hamilton Holdings, had purchased the entire operation for considerably less than its market value, with plans to restructure and revitalize the business. Derek Thompson, my disrespectful son-in-law, had been unknowingly working for me since March. The irony was delicious, but what made it even sweeter was Derek's complete ignorance of his precarious position. He'd spent the last 6 months bragging to Amanda about his new job opportunities and impressed management at Thompson Auto Group, completely unaware that his performance reviews crossed my desk every month. And those reviews painted a picture of an employee who was, frankly, failing at every measurable metric. Low sales numbers, multiple customer complaints, unprofessional behavior toward female colleagues, a tendency to blame external factors rather than take responsibility for his poor performance. Derek Thompson was exactly the kind of employee that smart business owners eliminated quickly before they could damage company culture and reputation. I'd been planning to address his employment status gradually, perhaps through a performance improvement plan followed by a gentle transition out of the company. But Derek's little group chat stunt had just accelerated my timeline considerably. I opened my laptop and navigated to the employee files for Thompson Auto Group. Derek's personnel folder contained 6 months of documentation that would make tomorrow's conversation very interesting indeed. Sales performance. Bottom 10% of sales team consistently. Customer feedback, 23% satisfaction rating. Company average, 87%. Colleague, reviews, multiple complaints about inappropriate comments toward female staff members. Attendance, 14 unexcused absences in 6 months. Professional development, declined to participate in required training programs, but it was the most recent incident report that sealed Derek's fate. Last week, he'd apparently told a female customer that she didn't understand enough about cars to make big financial decisions, and suggested she bring her husband back to handle the real negotiation. The customer had filed a formal complaint and taken her business to a competitor. In Derek's mind, he was probably sitting in his living room right now, congratulating himself on putting his difficult mother-in-law in her place. He'd successfully established that I was unwelcome at family gatherings, demonstrated his authority in front of his wife and parents, and marked his territory like the alpha male he fancied himself to be. What Derek didn't know was that tomorrow morning, he had a mandatory meeting scheduled with the CEO of Thompson Auto Group to discuss his future with the company. The appointment had been on his calendar for 3 days, set up by my assistant under the guise of a routine performance review with upper management. Derek had never met the mysterious CEO who'd taken over the company 6 months earlier. All employee communications came through the general manager, and I'd deliberately maintained a low profile during the transition period. As far as Derek knew, his new boss was some anonymous corporate executive who cared only about numbers and bottom lines. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing Derek's employment file in detail, not because I needed additional justification for what was about to happen, but because I wanted to be absolutely thorough in my approach. When Derek Thompson walked into my office tomorrow morning, I wanted to have every fact, every figure, every documented instance of his professional inadequacy laid out with surgical precision. But this wasn't just about revenge, though I'll admit revenge was certainly a component of my motivation. This was about establishing boundaries and consequences for behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. Derek had spent 2 years systematically undermining my relationship with Amanda, creating artificial conflicts, and positioning himself as the reasonable voice protecting his wife from her overbearing mother. He'd convinced Amanda that my success as a businesswoman somehow diminished her autonomy as a married woman. He'd framed my offers to help financially as attempts to control their decisions. He'd recast my presence at family events as intrusion rather than inclusion. And apparently, he'd succeeded so completely that my own daughter now viewed me as someone who would ruin their gatherings simply by existing in the same space. Well, Derek Thompson was about to learn that actions have consequences, that humiliating powerful women in public requires a level of confidence that should be backed up by actual power, and that sometimes the mother-in-law you dismiss as a nuisance might just be the person who signs your paychecks. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Mom, I hope you're not upset about tomorrow. Derek just thinks smaller gatherings work better for family bonding." I stared at the message, marveling at how completely Derek had rewritten the narrative. My exclusion wasn't cruelty, it was family optimization. My absence wasn't rejection, it was strategic guest list management. I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. I hope you all have a wonderful time." Because tomorrow morning, Derek Thompson would discover that his definition of family bonding was about to undergo a dramatic revision. Some lessons I was about to demonstrate were best delivered with the full authority of a corner office and a carefully documented paper trail, and some mother-in-laws were considerably more powerful than the men who underestimated them. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed fitting for what I had planned. I arrived at Thompson Auto Group at 8:30 a.m., a full hour before Derek's scheduled appointment, to review his termination paperwork one final time and ensure everything was legally airtight. The dealership was quiet on weekend mornings, with only security and a skeleton maintenance crew on duty. I let myself into the executive offices with my key card and settled behind the mahogany desk in the CEO's corner office that Derek had never seen before. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. While Derek was probably waking up in the house that I'd co-signed the mortgage for, preparing for a barbecue at his parents' house that he'd banned me from attending, he had no idea that his professional life was about to collide spectacularly with his personal cruelty. I'd spent 5 years building Hamilton Holdings into a multi-million-dollar enterprise after my husband David died, transforming my grief into determination and my marketing background into a diversified business portfolio. Thompson Auto Group was my latest acquisition, purchased not for sentimental reasons, but because struggling automotive dealerships represented excellent turnaround opportunities when managed properly. The previous owner, Richard Thompson, no relation to Derek despite the surname coincidence, had been hemorrhaging money through poor management, outdated sales practices, and a toxic workplace culture that drove away both customers and quality employees. I'd bought the business with plans to modernize operations, implement new training programs, and establish zero-tolerance policies for the kind of unprofessional behavior that had been damaging the company's reputation. Derek Thompson had been hired 3 months before my acquisition, during the final death throes of Richard Thompson's mismanagement. He'd somehow convinced Amanda that landing a job at Thompson Auto Group represented a significant career advancement, when in reality he'd joined a sinking ship that was hiring anyone desperate enough to work on commission in an increasingly hostile environment. What Derek didn't know, and what I'd discovered through employee interviews during the transition, was that his hiring had been a source of complaint among the existing female staff members from his very first week. Multiple women had reported inappropriate comments, condescending behavior, and a general attitude that suggested he viewed female colleagues and customers as inherently less knowledgeable about automotive matters. At 9:25 a.m., I heard voices in the outer office. Derek had arrived early for his 9:30 appointment, accompanied by Amanda, whom he'd apparently brought along to show her where I work and introduce her to my professional environment. The addition of my daughter to this morning's revelation would complicate matters emotionally, but it might also help Amanda understand exactly what kind of man she'd married. I could hear Derek speaking to my assistant Sarah through the open door. "Yeah, I'm Derek Thompson, here for the meeting with the CEO. I brought my wife Amanda to show her the operation here. Pretty impressive setup we've got." Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Hamilton is ready for you. Please go ahead into her office." "Mrs. Hamilton? I thought the CEO was a man." "No, sir. Margaret Hamilton has been CEO since the acquisition in March." I heard Derek's footsteps pause outside my door, probably processing this information and wondering why he'd assumed the CEO was male when he'd never actually met the person. Then the footsteps resumed, accompanied by the click of Amanda's heels on the polished floor. "Honey, I didn't realize the new boss was a woman," Derek murmured to Amanda, just loud enough for me to hear through the partially open door. "Derek, that's not exactly something you need to—" "I'm just saying, it explains some of the changes around here. Women in leadership positions always want to micromanage everything." I almost smiled at the perfect setup Derek was providing for his own downfall. In 30 seconds, he was about to discover exactly which woman in a leadership position had been micromanaging his employment situation for the past 6 months. "Come in," I called, my voice carrying the professional authority I'd cultivated over years of running successful businesses. Derek pushed open the door and stepped confidently into my office, his chest puffed out with the importance of a man about to impress his wife by showing off his workplace achievements. Amanda followed a step behind, looking around the spacious corner office with mild curiosity. Then they both saw me sitting behind the executive desk, and their expressions shifted from confidence to confusion to absolute shock in the span of 3 seconds. "Mom?" Amanda's voice was barely above a whisper. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, no sound emerging as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were telling him. "Good morning," I said calmly, gesturing toward the 2 chairs positioned in front of my desk. "Please have a seat. We have quite a bit to discuss." "Margaret, what are you doing here?" Derek finally managed, his voice higher pitched than usual. "I work here, Derek. I own this company. I've been your employer for the past 6 months. I opened the folder containing his employment records and performance reviews. "Which brings us to why you're here this morning." Amanda sank into her chair, her face pale as she tried to reconcile her understanding of her mother's business activities with the reality of finding me in the CEO's chair of her husband's workplace. Derek remained standing, his face flushing red as the implications of my revelation began to sink in. "You bought Thompson Auto Group?" 6 months ago, yes, through Hamilton Holdings, which is my investment company. "I've been reviewing employee performance as part of our restructuring process, and I'm afraid your numbers are quite concerning." "Margaret, you can't be serious. This is completely inappropriate. You're my mother-in-law. There are conflict of interest issues here." "On the contrary, Derek, the conflict of interest would be if I allowed family relationships to excuse poor job performance and inappropriate workplace behavior, which is exactly what I'm not going to do." I spread Derek's performance reviews across the desk where both he and Amanda could see them. 6 months of documented failure, customer complaints, and colleague concerns laid out with bureaucratic precision. "Your sales numbers place you in the bottom 10% of our team consistently. You have a 23% customer satisfaction rating, compared to our company average of 87%. You've received multiple complaints about inappropriate behavior toward female colleagues and customers." Amanda leaned forward to read the documents, her expression growing more concerned as she processed the extent of Derek's professional inadequacies. "These can't be accurate," Derek protested. "I've been one of the stronger performers here. Management has been very impressed with my—" "Derek, I am management. I review every performance metric personally. I read every customer complaint. I approve every personnel decision." I pulled out the incident report from last week, including this complaint from Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison, who filed a formal grievance after you told her she didn't understand enough about cars to make financial decisions and suggested she bring her husband back for the real negotiation. That was a misunderstanding. She was clearly overwhelmed by the technical specifications. She was a mechanical engineer with 25 years of experience in automotive manufacturing, Derek. She bought her car from our competitor and specifically mentioned your condescending attitude in her review on 3 separate platforms. Amanda was staring at Derek with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, discovering that her boyfriend had been lying to her about seeing other girls. Derek, you told me that customer loved working with you. You said she praised your expertise. Amanda, I can explain. No, I interrupted, maintaining my professional tone despite the personal satisfaction I was experiencing. What Derek needs to understand is that his employment with Thompson Auto Group is being terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Derek's face went from red to white in an instant, while Amanda's mouth fell open in shock. You can't fire me for personal reasons, Derek said, his voice desperate now. This is retaliation for family disagreements. This is termination for cause based on documented poor performance, customer complaints, and violation of company policies regarding professional conduct. I slid the official termination letter across the desk. Everything is documented according to employment law requirements. You'll find that your severance package includes continuation of health benefits for 30 days and payment for unused vacation time. Margaret, this is insane. You can't destroy my career because you're upset about a family barbecue. I looked at Derek Thompson, the man who'd spent 2 years systematically undermining my relationship with my daughter, who'd just yesterday humiliated me in front of his family, who'd consistently underestimated the woman he'd dismissed as a controlling mother-in-law. Derek, your career isn't being destroyed because of a barbecue. It's being destroyed because you're bad at your job and you treat people poorly. The barbecue simply provided clarity about your character that confirmed what your work performance had already demonstrated. Some reckonings, I was learning, were worth waiting for, and some people needed to discover that their actions had consequences they'd never anticipated. The silence that followed my announcement stretched for nearly 30 seconds, broken only by the distant sound of weekend traffic and Derek's increasingly labored breathing. I watched him process the reality of his situation. The man who'd confidently dismissed his mother-in-law from a family gathering was now facing unemployment delivered by that same mother-in-law from behind a CEO's desk. This can't be legal, Derek finally said, his voice shaking with rage and desperation. You can't fire someone because of personal family issues. I'll contact an employment attorney. Please do, I replied calmly, sliding another document across the desk. Here's a complete record of your performance reviews, customer complaints, and documented policy violations over the past 6 months. Any employment attorney will tell you this termination is not only legal, but long overdue. Amanda picked up the termination letter, reading it with the careful attention she'd always given to important documents. As a college graduate with a business degree, she understood exactly what she was seeing. Derek, these performance metrics, they're terrible. Your sales numbers are consistently below minimum standards. Amanda, don't let her manipulate you. This is clearly a setup. She's been planning this since she bought the company, probably waiting for an excuse to get revenge on me. Revenge for what? I asked, genuinely curious about Derek's perspective on our relationship. For challenging your control over Amanda, for setting healthy boundaries in our marriage, for refusing to let you manipulate our family decisions with your money and your business connections. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized how completely Derek had rewritten the narrative of our relationship in his mind. In his version of events, I was the controlling villain, and he was the heroic husband protecting his wife from her overbearing mother. Derek, can you give me a specific example of how I've tried to control Amanda's decisions? Are you kidding? The constant offers to pay for things we can handle ourselves, the suggestions about Amanda's career, the way you insert yourself into conversations about our financial planning. You mean the times I offered to help with your mortgage when you were 3 months behind on payments? The career advice Amanda specifically asked for when she was considering job offers? The financial planning conversations that happened because you asked for my input on investment strategies? Derek's face flushed deeper red. That's not how it happened. Actually, Derek, that's exactly how it happened. Amanda's voice was quiet but firm. Mom has never offered unsolicited help or advice. I've asked for her input on every major decision because she's successful and experienced. Amanda, you're letting her rewrite history. No, Derek. I think you're the one who's been rewriting history. Amanda turned to look at her husband with an expression that suggested she was seeing him clearly for the first time. I've been thinking about this for months, actually. The way you react whenever I mention Mom's advice, or when I want to spend time with her, or when she offers to help us. I remained silent, recognizing that Amanda was processing something important about her marriage that went far beyond Derek's employment termination. Derek, you told me Mom was being controlling when she offered to co-sign our mortgage, but we needed that co-signature to qualify for the loan. You said she was interfering when she suggested I apply for the marketing position at Henderson & Associates, but that job increased my salary by 40%. You complained that she was inserting herself into our financial planning, but you were the one who asked her to review our investment portfolio. Amanda, you're missing the bigger picture here. What bigger picture? The picture where my successful, supportive mother is somehow the villain in our marriage? The picture where asking for help from family is manipulation? Or the picture where you've been lying to me about your job performance while complaining that Mom doesn't respect your professional achievements? Derek looked between Amanda and me with growing panic, apparently realizing that his carefully constructed narrative was collapsing in real time. You don't understand the pressure I've been under here, working for a company in transition, dealing with demanding management. Derek, you didn't even know who owned the company until 10 minutes ago, Amanda said. How could you have been dealing with demanding management when you'd never met the CEO? The general manager has been implementing policies. The general manager has been implementing my policies, I interjected. Policies designed to improve customer service, increase sales performance, and eliminate workplace harassment. The fact that you experience those policies as demanding says more about your work habits than it does about management expectations. Amanda was reading through Derek's performance reviews with increasing disbelief. Derek, this customer complaint says you told a woman she should let the men handle the car buying decision. Another one says you implied a female customer was too emotional to make rational financial choices about vehicle purchases. Those customers were clearly overwhelmed by technical information. Derek, stop. Amanda's voice cut through his explanation with finality. Just stop. These aren't misunderstandings or overwhelmed customers. This is a pattern of behavior that I'm recognizing from our own relationship. I watched my daughter connect dots that had probably been forming in her subconscious for months. The way Derek dismissed her opinions about financial decisions. The way he explained away her concerns about his behavior toward other women. The way he positioned himself as the rational voice protecting her from external influences, including her own mother. Amanda, you're being manipulated right now. Can't you see that? Your mother orchestrated this entire situation to drive a wedge between us. I orchestrated nothing, Derek. I bought a failing business 6 months ago as an investment opportunity. You happened to work there. Your poor performance and inappropriate behavior happened to make you eligible for termination. Your decision to humiliate me publicly yesterday happened to accelerate my timeline. So you're admitting this is retaliation. I'm admitting that yesterday's group chat message clarified something important about your character that your work performance had already suggested, that you have fundamental issues with respecting women, especially women in positions of authority or independence. Amanda set down the performance reviews and looked at Derek with an expression that was part disappointment and part recognition. Derek, how long have you been lying to me about your job performance? I haven't been lying. I've been dealing with unfair management and unrealistic expectations. These reviews go back 6 months. 6 months of consistently poor performance, customer complaints, and workplace issues. How long have you been telling me that management was impressed with your work and considering you for promotions? Derek's silence provided Amanda with the answer she needed. 6 months, Amanda said quietly. You've been lying to me for 6 months about how well you were doing at work while complaining that Mom doesn't respect your professional success. Amanda, I was protecting you from unnecessary stress. You were lying to me about your professional failures while simultaneously isolating me from the one person who could have helped us navigate financial difficulties if your job situation became problematic. I felt a surge of pride watching Amanda analyze the situation with the clear thinking that had made her successful in her own career. Derek's manipulation tactics were becoming visible to her, and she was responding with the intelligence and strength I'd raised her to possess. "Mom," Amanda said, turning to me with an expression that was part apology and part realization, "I owe you an enormous apology. Not just for the group chat yesterday, but for months of allowing Derek to convince me that your support was somehow problematic. Amanda, you don't need to apologize for being loyal to your husband. You need to decide whether your husband has been worthy of that loyalty." Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "This is unbelievable. You've turned my wife against me using your business position to manipulate the situation. Derek, I've provided documentation of your work performance and allowed you and Amanda to draw your own conclusions. The fact that those conclusions are unfavorable to you isn't manipulation, it's accountability. Some truths, I was learning, required the right setting to be fully revealed, and some marriages were built on foundations that couldn't survive transparency about character, competence, and respect. Derek was about to discover which category his marriage fell into. Derek stared at Amanda and me for another moment, his face cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. Anger, disbelief, panic, and finally, a calculating coldness that I'd never seen from him before. "Fine," he said, his voice taking on a bitter edge. "If this is how you want to play it, Margaret, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Using your business position to destroy your son-in-law's career because he wouldn't let you control his marriage." "Derek, that's not what happened here," Amanda said firmly. "You were failing at your job long before yesterday's group chat. Amanda, she's manipulated this entire situation. She probably bought this company specifically to have power over me." I couldn't help but laugh at the sheer narcissism of Derek's assumption. "Derek, I bought Thompson Auto Group because it was a profitable investment opportunity. You represent less than 1% of this company's employees, and until yesterday, your existence was barely a footnote in my business planning." "Right, and I'm supposed to believe that?" "You're supposed to believe documented evidence and objective performance metrics. But Derek, what you believe isn't really relevant anymore, because your employment here is terminated regardless of your opinions about my motivations." Derek gathered up the termination papers with sharp, angry movements, his professional composure completely abandoned now that his audience was family rather than potential car buyers. "This won't stand. I'll file complaints with the labor board, contact employment attorneys, and make sure everyone knows that Hamilton Holdings engages in illegal retaliation against employees." "Please do," I replied. "I'm confident that any investigation will confirm that your termination was based solely on performance issues and documented policy violations. We'll see about that." Derek turned to Amanda, with desperation creeping back into his voice. "Amanda, you can't seriously be taking her side in this. She just destroyed my career out of spite." "Derek, she didn't destroy your career. Your work performance destroyed your career. Mom just documented it and made the business decision that any competent CEO would make, after she deliberately humiliated me at a family barbecue that she wasn't even invited to. That I wasn't invited to because you publicly uninvited me in a group chat where you said I would ruin the whole party. Derek, you humiliated yourself." Amanda stood up, smoothing her skirt with the kind of decisive movement that indicated she'd reached a conclusion about something important. "Derek, I think we need to go home and have a serious conversation about our marriage." "Amanda, you can't be serious. You're going to let your mother's business vendetta destroy our relationship?" "I'm going to reevaluate a relationship with someone who's been lying to me about his job performance for 6 months while systematically undermining my relationship with my mother." Amanda's voice was calm, but final. "Derek, I've been making excuses for your behavior and your attitudes for 2 years, convincing myself that your issues with Mom were about boundaries rather than control." "That's exactly what they were about." "No, they weren't. They were about your discomfort with successful women and your need to be the dominant voice in any relationship, even when your opinions aren't supported by facts or expertise." I watched Derek's face as he realized that Amanda was not only seeing through his manipulation tactics, but articulating them with clarity that suggested she'd been thinking about this for longer than today's revelation. "Amanda, I've never tried to control you. You've spent 2 years convincing me that my mother's support was actually interference. You've dismissed her business advice even when that advice proved profitable. You've complained about her controlling behavior while lying about your own professional competence and undermining my confidence in my own judgment. That's not how I intended. Derek, I don't care how you intended it. I care about the actual impact of your behavior on my life and my relationship. Derek looked between Amanda and me with growing desperation, apparently realizing that his usual tactics weren't working in this environment where his professional failures were documented and his personal manipulations were being examined in clear light. Margaret, if you think firing me will solve whatever issues you have with our family dynamics, you're wrong. This will only create more problems. Derek, I don't have issues with family dynamics. I have issues with being publicly disrespected by someone whose career I could destroy with a phone call, which, as it turns out, I just did. You're admitting that this was personal retaliation. I'm admitting that personal disrespect from a professional subordinate tends to clarify business decisions about that subordinate's continued employment. Amanda moved toward the door, her body language indicating that she considered this meeting concluded. Derek, we're going home. You need to clean out your desk and return company property, and we need to discuss what happens next in our marriage. Amanda, please don't make any hasty decisions based on your mother's manipulation of this situation. Amanda stopped and turned back to Derek with an expression that reminded me of her father, patient but firm, the look of someone who'd reached the end of their tolerance for nonsense. Derek, Mom didn't manipulate this situation. You created this situation by performing poorly at work while lying about it, by treating women inappropriately in professional settings, and by publicly humiliating the one person who supported our family financially when we needed help. I never asked for her financial support because I handled all the conversations about the mortgage co-signing, the emergency loan when your car needed repairs, and the down payment assistance when we bought our house. Derek, you've been benefiting from Mom's generosity while complaining about her interference for 2 years. I felt a mixture of pride and sadness watching Amanda articulate truths that Derek had apparently convinced her to doubt or ignore throughout their marriage. My daughter was stronger and smarter than Derek had given her credit for, but she'd been generous enough to make excuses for his behavior until his professional failures made his character impossible to rationalize away. Mrs. Hamilton, Derek said, his voice taking on a formal tone as he apparently recognized that his family-based appeals weren't working. I'll be consulting with attorneys about wrongful termination and workplace retaliation. This isn't over. Derek, this conversation is definitely over. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal belongings, and your access cards and company phone will be deactivated immediately. You can't prevent me from seeking legal recourse. I'm not preventing anything. I'm informing you that Thompson Auto Group takes employment law seriously and maintains thorough documentation to support all personnel decisions. Derek looked at Amanda one last time, searching for any sign that she might support him against my unreasonable business decision. Amanda, I hope you realize that your mother has just demonstrated that she's willing to destroy people who don't submit to her control. No, Derek. Mom has just demonstrated that she's willing to hold people accountable for their behavior and performance, even when those people are family members who assume they deserve special treatment. As Derek left my office with the kind of stiff dignity that people maintain when they're trying to salvage pride from humiliating circumstances, I realized that Amanda had learned something valuable about the difference between support and control, between family loyalty and enabling poor behavior. Some lessons, I was discovering, required the right combination of professional authority and personal consequences to be fully absorbed. And some sons-in-law needed to learn that dismissing powerful women had costs that extended far beyond hurt feelings and family tension. Derek Thompson was about to discover exactly how expensive his assumptions about female authority were going to be. The drive to Derek and Amanda's house 20 minutes later was conducted in tense silence, with Derek gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and Amanda staring out the passenger window with the expression of someone reevaluating fundamental assumptions about her life. I followed them in my own car, not because I'd been invited, but because Amanda had quietly asked me to come with them before we left the dealership. Mom, I think I'm going to need support for this conversation, and I'm realizing that Derek has been systematically discouraging me from asking for your help when I needed it. The house that Derek and Amanda lived in was a modest two-bedroom ranch in a subdivision that had been built 15 years earlier for young families and first-time homeowners. I'd co-signed the mortgage 2 years ago when Derek's credit score and employment history hadn't been sufficient to qualify for the loan on their own. At the time, Derek had been grudgingly grateful for my assistance while making it clear that he viewed the co-signing as a temporary necessity rather than a generous family support. Now, as I parked behind Derek's car in the driveway, I couldn't help but notice the small details that suggested financial stress Derek had been hiding from Amanda. The lawn needed professional attention, the gutters were showing signs of deferred maintenance, and Derek's car had a small dent in the rear panel that hadn't been repaired. Inside the house, the tension was immediate and uncomfortable. Derek went straight to the kitchen and opened a beer, despite it being barely 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, while Amanda sat down at their dining room table with the kind of careful control that suggested she was trying to organize her thoughts before speaking. "Derek, I need you to explain something to me," Amanda said, her voice calm but firm. "I need to understand how you've been telling me for 6 months that your job was going well, that management was impressed with your performance, and that you were being considered for promotions, when the documented reality is that you've been failing consistently and facing customer complaints." Derek took a long drink from his beer before answering. "Amanda, you don't understand the automotive sales industry. Performance metrics don't tell the whole story. Customer complaints often come from people who are upset about pricing or financing issues that have nothing to do with sales performance. Derek, one of the complaints specifically documented you telling a customer that she should let the men handle the car buying decision. That's not about pricing or financing. That's about your attitude toward women. That customer was clearly overwhelmed by the technical specifications." "Stop." Amanda's interruption was sharp and final. "Stop explaining away documented complaints as customer misunderstandings. I've read the reports, Derek. Multiple customers, multiple incidents, consistent patterns of inappropriate behavior." I remained silent, recognizing that Amanda needed to navigate this conversation with Derek without my input. This wasn't about my conflict with Derek anymore. This was about Amanda discovering truths about her husband that she'd been avoiding or rationalizing for months. "Amanda, you're letting your mother manipulate you into seeing problems that don't exist. She fired me out of spite, and now she's trying to convince you that her vindictive behavior was justified. Derek, Mom owns the company where you work. She's seen your performance metrics for 6 months. If your performance had been good, would she have fired you just because of yesterday's group chat? Yes, because she's controlling and vindictive, and she can't stand that I won't let her run our marriage." Amanda stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where she'd planted a small vegetable garden that was now showing signs of neglect due to Derek's recent financial stress about water bills. "Derek, I've been thinking about something. In the 2 years we've been married, every time I've wanted to ask Mom for advice or help, you've convinced me that doing so would be enabling her controlling behavior or undermining our independence as a couple, because that's exactly what it would have been. But Derek, Mom has never given unsolicited advice. She's never imposed her opinions on our decisions. She's never used her financial help as leverage to control our choices." Amanda turned back to face Derek with growing clarity. "I've always had to ask for her input, and when I've asked, her advice has consistently been helpful and accurate." "Amanda, you're rewriting history." "No, Derek, I'm remembering history accurately for the first time in months. You've been rewriting history to make Mom's support look like interference, and her expertise look like controlling behavior." Derek finished his beer and opened another one, his movements becoming more agitated as Amanda's analysis became more pointed. "Let me ask you something specific," Amanda continued. "When Mom suggested I apply for the marketing position at Henderson & Associates, you said she was trying to control my career choices, but that job increased my salary by 40% and gave me the experience I needed to advance professionally. How was that advice controlling rather than helpful? Because she should have trusted us to make our own career decisions without her input. Derek, I asked for her input because she has 20 years of experience in marketing and business development. Why wouldn't I ask for advice from someone with relevant expertise? Because married couples should be able to make decisions without outside interference." "Outside interference? Derek, she's my mother, and she's a successful businesswoman. Asking for her advice isn't interference, it's smart resource utilization. I watched Derek struggle to defend a position that was becoming increasingly untenable as Amanda applied logical analysis to their family dynamics. His arguments depended on emotional manipulation rather than factual accuracy, and Amanda was too intelligent to be swayed by emotional manipulation once she recognized it. Amanda, I can see that you're upset about my job situation. But don't let this crisis destroy our marriage. We can work through these problems together. Derek, I'm not upset about your job situation. I'm upset about your dishonesty about your job situation. I'm upset about the pattern of behavior that got you fired. And I'm upset about the way you've been systematically undermining my relationship with my mother while lying about your own competence and success. I haven't been systematically undermining anything. Yes, you have. Every conversation about Mom's offers to help, you framed as her being controlling. Every piece of advice she gave that proved beneficial, you dismissed as luck or coincidence. Every time I wanted to spend time with her or ask for her opinion, you found reasons why that would be problematic for our marriage. Derek set down his second beer and looked at Amanda with an expression that combined desperation with a dawning recognition that his usual tactics weren't working. Amanda, marriages require boundaries. I was trying to establish healthy boundaries between us and your mother's tendency to insert herself into our decisions. Derek, Mom has never inserted herself into our decisions. I've invited her input on important choices because she's experienced, successful, and I trust her judgment. The fact that you experienced my relationship with my mother as a threat to your authority in our marriage says more about your insecurities than it does about her behavior. The conversation was reaching a point where Derek would either need to acknowledge the accuracy of Amanda's analysis or escalate his defensive tactics. Based on what I'd observed about his character over the past 2 years, I suspected he would choose escalation. Amanda, if you choose your mother's version of events over your husband's, you're basically ending our marriage. Derek, I'm not choosing anyone's version of events. I'm looking at documented evidence and recognizing patterns of behavior that I've been ignoring for months. Some ultimatums, I realized, reveal more about the person delivering them than the person receiving them. And some marriages reach moments where truth becomes incompatible with the foundations they've been built on. Derek was about to discover which category his marriage fell into. Amanda's response to Derek's ultimatum was immediate and decisive in a way that surprised even me. Derek, you're absolutely right. If I choose truth and documented evidence over your version of events, I am ending our marriage. So let me be very clear. I choose truth. Derek's face went pale as he realized his manipulation tactic had backfired spectacularly. Amanda, that's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You just gave me an ultimatum. Believe your lies or end our marriage. I'm choosing to end our marriage. I remained silent in my chair by the window, recognizing that Amanda had reached a conclusion that would reshape her entire life and that my role now was simply to provide support for whatever decisions she made. Amanda, you're being irrational. You can't end a marriage because of one bad day at work. This isn't about one bad day at work, Derek. This is about 6 months of lies regarding your job performance, 2 years of systematic manipulation regarding my relationship with my mother, and a pattern of disrespecting women that I've been ignoring because I wanted our marriage to succeed. Derek stood up and began pacing around their small living room, his agitation increasing as he realized that Amanda wasn't responding to his usual emotional manipulation tactics. You're letting your mother poison your mind against me. Can't you see what she's doing? She fired me to break up our marriage because she's never approved of me. Derek, Mom didn't need to break up our marriage. You've been undermining it yourself for months with dishonesty and manipulation. She just provided clarity about your character that I should have recognized earlier. Amanda, please. We can work through these problems. I'll find another job. I'll be more honest about work situations. I'll try to get along better with your mother. Derek, you fundamentally don't respect women in positions of authority or independence. That's not something you fix with promises to try harder. That's a core character issue that affects how you treat me, how you treat my mother, how you treat female colleagues and customers. Amanda sat back down at the dining table and looked at Derek with the kind of analytical attention she'd always applied to important business problems. Let me ask you something, Derek. In the past 2 years, Can you think of a single time when you deferred to my expertise or judgment on an important decision? Derek's silence stretched long enough to provide Amanda with her answer. Can you think of a single time when you acknowledged that Mom's advice or assistance was valuable without first expressing resentment about her interference in our decisions? More silence. Can you think of a single female colleague or customer whose professional competence you've respected without qualification or condescension? Amanda, you're asking loaded questions. I'm asking simple questions about respect and recognition of female competence. The fact that you consider them loaded suggests that honest answers would be uncomfortable for you. I watched Derek realize that he was trapped in a conversation where his actual attitudes and behaviors were being examined systematically, without the emotional manipulation and deflection tactics he usually relied on to avoid accountability. Amanda, if you divorce me over this, you'll regret it. You'll realize that I was trying to protect our marriage from your mother's controlling influence, and by then it will be too late to repair the damage. Derek, I'm not going to regret choosing honesty over manipulation, independence over control, or family relationships based on mutual respect over relationships based on isolation and resentment. You think your mother respects you? She just demonstrated that she's willing to destroy your husband's career to get revenge for a family disagreement. Amanda looked at Derek with something that might have been pity. Derek, Mom didn't destroy your career to get revenge. She terminated an employee who was failing professionally and behaving inappropriately toward women. The fact that the employee happened to be her son-in-law probably made the decision more difficult, not easier. That's not how she saw it. How do you know how she saw it? You've spent 2 years assuming the worst possible motivations for everything Mom does, while consistently lying about your own behavior and performance. Derek sat down heavily on their couch, apparently realizing that his marriage was ending and that none of his usual tactics were effective in this conversation. Amanda, what do you want from me? An apology? Acknowledgement that I made mistakes? A promise to change my behavior? I want you to understand why your apologies and promises aren't sufficient. Derek, you've demonstrated fundamental disrespect for women's intelligence and autonomy. You've lied consistently about important matters. You've systematically undermined my relationships with people who care about me. Those aren't mistakes you fix with apologies. Those are character issues that would require years of genuine change. So you're giving up on our marriage without giving me a chance to change? Amanda was quiet for several minutes, considering Derek's question with the careful thought she'd always applied to major decisions. Derek, I gave you 2 years to change patterns of behavior that I kept hoping were temporary or situational. I made excuses for your attitudes toward Mom, rationalized your resentment of her success, and convinced myself that your need to be the dominant voice in our relationship was about healthy boundaries rather than control. Amanda, marriage requires compromises. Marriage requires mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to each other's growth and happiness. Derek, you've spent 2 years prioritizing your ego over my relationships, your comfort over truthful communication, and your need for control over our partnership. I've never tried to control you. You've tried to control who I can ask for advice, who I can accept help from, and how I should interpret the motivations of people who care about me. Derek, that's a form of emotional control that I'm no longer willing to tolerate. I felt a surge of pride watching Amanda articulate boundaries and standards that would serve her well in any future relationships. Derek's manipulation had been subtle and persistent, but Amanda was intelligent enough to recognize the patterns once she was able to see them clearly. So, what happens now? Derek asked, his voice defeated. Now you move out. I'll file for divorce. We'll divide our assets according to the law. And I'll rebuild my life with honesty and relationships based on mutual respect rather than control and manipulation. Amanda, you're making a huge mistake. You'll realize that I was the best thing that ever happened to you. Amanda stood up and walked to the front door, opening it in a clear signal that this conversation was concluded. Derek, the best thing that ever happened to me was learning to recognize the difference between love and manipulation, between support and control, between someone who values my judgment and someone who consistently undermines it. As Derek gathered some personal belongings and prepared to leave the house that would soon be solely Amanda's responsibility, I realized that my daughter had learned something valuable about the importance of choosing partners who enhanced rather than diminished her relationships with people she loved. Mom, Amanda said after Derek had left, I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than yesterday's group chat. I've been allowing Derek to convince me that your success and independence were somehow threatening to my marriage instead of assets that I should have appreciated. Some apologies, I was learning, weren't necessary between people who loved each other unconditionally, and some daughters were strong enough to choose difficult truths over comfortable lies when their integrity demanded it. Tomorrow, Amanda would begin rebuilding her life with the wisdom that came from recognizing manipulation before it could do permanent damage. Tonight, we would plan her future with the clarity that came from choosing family relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear and control. 3 days after Derek moved out, Amanda and I were sitting in my home office discussing the practical aspects of her divorce when my assistant Sarah called with news that added an interesting wrinkle to our situation. Mrs. Hamilton, I've received several phone calls today from employees at Thompson Auto Group. Apparently, Derek Thompson has been contacting former colleagues and making claims about wrongful termination and workplace retaliation. What kind of claims, Sarah? He's telling people that you fired him because he wouldn't allow you to control his marriage, and he's suggesting that other employees should be concerned about job security if they have any family connections to company ownership. I put the call on speaker so Amanda could hear the conversation. Sarah, have any employees expressed actual concerns about their job security? No, quite the opposite. Several people have mentioned that Derek's termination has improved workplace morale significantly. Apparently, his behavior toward female colleagues had been a source of ongoing tension that people were afraid to report formally. Amanda looked at me with raised eyebrows. Derek was creating problems for other employees too? Apparently so. Sarah, what kind of feedback are you getting about Derek's allegations? Most people are expressing relief that he's no longer with the company. Jennifer Martinez from the accounting department specifically asked me to thank you for finally addressing the Derek Thompson problem that had been making several women uncomfortable for months. After ending the call, Amanda sat back in her chair with the expression of someone whose understanding of her marriage was continuing to evolve. Mom, I'm starting to realize that Derek's issues with women weren't limited to our family dynamics. He had problems respecting women in general, and I somehow convinced myself that his specific issues with you were about family boundaries rather than fundamental attitudes. Amanda, manipulative people are often very skilled at compartmentalizing their behavior and making their victims feel like isolated incidents rather than part of larger patterns. But I should have recognized the patterns. The way he dismissed my professional opinions, the way he reacted to female authority figures, the way he consistently assumed that women were less capable of handling complex decisions. I leaned forward across my desk, recognizing that Amanda was processing guilt about missing warning signs that might have been clearer in hindsight. Amanda, Derek was subtle and strategic about his manipulation. He made you feel like you were being overly sensitive or misinterpreting his behavior when you noticed problems. That's a classic tactic of emotionally manipulative people. I just feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. You feel stupid because Derek spent 2 years convincing you that your perceptions were unreliable and your instincts were wrong. Amanda, that's not a reflection of your intelligence. It's evidence of his skill at psychological manipulation. My phone rang again, this time with an unknown number that I answered cautiously. Mrs. Hamilton? This is Patricia Morrison, Derek Thompson's mother. I need to speak with you about the terrible injustice you've done to my son. I gestured for Amanda to remain quiet while putting the call on speaker. Mrs. Morrison, I'm not sure what Derek has told you about his employment termination, but I can only discuss documented performance issues and company policies. Derek told me that you fired him because you're angry about family disagreements and that you're trying to destroy his marriage to Amanda. That's completely inappropriate and probably illegal. Mrs. Morrison, Derek was terminated for documented poor performance, customer complaints, and violation of company policies regarding professional behavior. His termination had nothing to do with family relationships. That's not what Derek said. He said you've been planning this revenge ever since you bought the company. Amanda gestured that she wanted to speak, and I nodded. Mrs. Morrison, this is Amanda. I was present when Mom explained Derek's termination, and I read all the performance documentation. Derek has been lying to me about his job performance for 6 months while failing consistently at work. Amanda, honey, you're letting your mother manipulate you against your own husband. Derek loves you and has been trying to protect your marriage from her controlling behavior. Mrs. Morrison, Derek has been controlling my behavior by convincing me that my mother's support was actually interference. I've realized that he systematically undermined my relationship with Mom because he felt threatened by her success and independence. There was a long pause before Mrs. Morrison responded, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Amanda, Derek is a good man who's been treated unfairly by a vindictive woman who can't accept that her daughter has her own life now. Mrs. Morrison, I interjected, Derek is welcome to pursue legal action if he believes his termination was inappropriate. However, I'm confident that any investigation will confirm that his firing was based solely on work performance and professional conduct issues. We'll see about that. Derek has contacted an employment attorney, and we're exploring all options for holding you accountable for this vindictive behavior. After Mrs. Morrison hung up, Amanda looked at me with a mixture of frustration and recognition. Mom, that conversation just clarified something important about Derek's family dynamics. His mother automatically assumed that any consequences Derek faced were someone else's fault, that any woman in authority was being vindictive, and that Derek's version of events was automatically accurate. What does that tell you about Derek's upbringing and assumptions about accountability? That he was raised to believe that his failures were always someone else's responsibility, especially when that someone else was a woman. Amanda paused, processing this insight. No wonder he couldn't accept that his job performance was his own fault. No wonder he assumed that your success was somehow threatening rather than admirable. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Margaret, this isn't over. You'll regret destroying my career and my marriage. Some people fight back when powerful women abuse their positions. I showed the message to Amanda, who read it with growing alarm. Mom, is that a threat? Should we contact the police? It's borderline threatening, but not specific enough to constitute a legal threat. However, I am going to document it and forward it to our legal department in case Derek's behavior escalates. Do you think he might actually try to cause problems for you professionally? I think Derek is discovering that actions have consequences, and people who aren't used to facing consequences sometimes react unpredictably when their manipulation tactics fail. That evening, Amanda and I were reviewing her divorce paperwork when my security system alerted me to movement in my driveway. Looking out the window, I could see Derek's car parked outside my house, with Derek himself standing on my front porch. Amanda, Derek is here. Do you want to talk to him? Not particularly. What does he want? The doorbell rang insistently, followed by loud knocking. Margaret, I know you're in there. We need to settle this situation before it gets out of hand. I considered ignoring Derek entirely, but his agitation was clearly escalating, and I preferred to address whatever grievance he had while Amanda was present as a witness. Derek, what do you want? I called through the door without opening it. I want to make a deal. You give me my job back with a clean employment record, and I'll stop telling people about your vindictive abuse of power. Amanda looked at me with disbelief. He's trying to blackmail you? Derek, your employment was terminated for legitimate performance and conduct reasons. There won't be any deals or negotiations about that decision. Margaret, you don't understand the damage this is causing. I have a wife to support, bills to pay, a reputation to maintain. You can't destroy people's lives because of personal grudges. Derek, you destroyed your own professional reputation through documented poor performance. You're destroying your own marriage through dishonesty and manipulation. And you're destroying your own credibility by attempting to blackmail your former employer. The knocking became more insistent, and Derek's voice grew louder. This isn't over, Margaret. People like you think you can use your money and power to control other people's lives, but there are consequences for that behavior. I called the police while Derek continued his increasingly agitated monologue from my front porch. Some men, I was learning, responded to accountability by escalating their inappropriate behavior rather than examining their own choices. And some situations required professional intervention to ensure that consequences remained proportional to the actions that created them. Derek Thompson was about to discover that intimidation tactics were considerably less effective than taking responsibility for his own failures. The police arrived within 15 minutes of my call, by which time Derek had escalated from knocking on my door to walking around my house, peering through windows and shouting accusations about powerful women who destroy men's careers for sport. Officers Martinez and Johnson approached Derek with professional calm while I explained the situation from inside my house. Sir, we've received a complaint about disturbing the peace and potential harassment. Do you live at this address? No. But this woman has destroyed my life and my marriage, and she needs to understand that her actions have consequences. Through my window, I watched Officer Martinez exchange glances with his partner as Derek's agitation became increasingly obvious. "Sir, what's your relationship to the homeowner? She's my mother-in-law, and she fired me from my job because I wouldn't let her control my marriage. She's abusing her power as a business owner to get revenge on family members." "Sir, employment disputes are civil matters, not criminal ones. You can't address workplace issues by coming to someone's private residence and causing a disturbance. This isn't just a workplace issue. She's systematically destroying my life." Amanda appeared beside me at the window, watching her estranged husband argue with police officers about his right to intimidate me at my own home. "Mom, he's completely lost perspective. He genuinely believes that facing consequences for his actions means he's being victimized." Officer Johnson approached my front door while his partner continued speaking with Derek near the street. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Johnson. Can you explain your relationship with the individual in your driveway and the nature of the dispute?" I opened the door and provided a concise summary of Derek's employment termination, his subsequent attempts at intimidation, and his current escalation to harassment at my private residence. "Has he made any specific threats against you or your property?" "He sent a text message saying that I'd regret my actions and that some people fight back when powerful women abuse their positions. Tonight he's saying that my actions will have consequences and that I need to understand the damage I'm causing." "May I see the text message?" I showed Officer Johnson Derek's message, which he photographed for documentation purposes. "Ma'am, while these statements are concerning, they're not specific enough to constitute legal threats. However, his presence at your residence after you've asked him to leave does constitute harassment. What are my options? We can issue a warning about harassment and disturbing the peace. If he returns to your property or continues attempting to contact you, you can file for a restraining order based on a pattern of harassment." Amanda joined our conversation at the front door. "Officer, Derek is my husband, and we're currently separated. I don't want him to have any legal justification for claiming that Mom is preventing him from contacting me." "Ma'am, are you residing here currently?" "Temporarily, while I'm filing for divorce and making other living arrangements." Officer Johnson consulted with his partner, then returned to explain Derek's options and consequences. "Sir, you're being issued a warning for harassment and disturbing the peace. You're required to leave this property immediately and not return without explicit permission from the homeowner. Any future contact with Ms. Hamilton should be conducted through appropriate legal channels if you have legitimate business disputes. This is ridiculous. I'm being treated like a criminal for trying to address the destruction of my career and marriage. Sir, if you have legitimate legal grievances, there are appropriate venues for addressing them. Showing up at someone's private residence and creating disturbances is not one of those venues." Derek looked toward the house where Amanda and I were standing in the doorway, his expression cycling through anger, desperation, and what might have been genuine confusion about why his intimidation tactics weren't producing the results he expected. "Amanda, please, don't let your mother destroy our marriage. We can work through these problems if you'll just think independently instead of letting her manipulate your decisions." "Derek, I am thinking independently. That's why I'm divorcing you. You're making a terrible mistake that you'll regret for the rest of your life." "Derek, the only mistake I'm regretting is not recognizing your manipulation tactics sooner." After the police left and Derek reluctantly departed, Amanda and I sat in my living room discussing the escalation of Derek's behavior and what it revealed about his character under pressure. "Mom, I've never seen Derek lose control like that before. In 2 years of marriage, he was always calculating and strategic about his arguments and manipulation. Tonight, he seemed genuinely unhinged." "Amanda, some people maintain their composure only as long as their tactics are working. When manipulation fails and accountability becomes unavoidable, their true character emerges. I'm starting to realize that Derek's entire approach to our relationship was strategic rather than emotional. He wasn't loving me. He was managing me." I felt sad for Amanda as she processed the recognition that her marriage had been built on manipulation rather than genuine partnership, but I was also proud of her clarity and strength in facing difficult truths. "Amanda, what are you learning about yourself through this experience?" "I'm learning that I'm stronger than I thought, smarter than Derek gave me credit for, and more capable of independent judgment than he wanted me to believe." Amanda paused, considering her words carefully. I'm also learning that I inherited more of your business instincts than I realized. What do you mean? Derek spent 2 years convincing me that seeking advice from successful people was weakness, that accepting help from family was dependence, and that trusting my own judgment was arrogance. But Mom, those are exactly the attitudes that would prevent someone from building a successful career or business. You're recognizing that Derek's advice was designed to limit your potential rather than develop it. Exactly. He didn't want a strong, independent wife who might outgrow him. He wanted a dependent wife who would validate his need to be the dominant partner in our relationship. My phone buzzed with an email from my attorney forwarding a legal notice that Derek's employment lawyer had sent regarding his wrongful termination case. Amanda, Derek has officially filed a wrongful termination claim. His attorney is alleging that I fired him for personal reasons unrelated to job performance. Will that be a problem? Not based on the documentation we have. Derek's employment file contains 6 months of performance reviews, customer complaints, and incident reports that clearly justify termination. His attorney will discover that this case has no merit once they review the actual evidence. What if Derek tries to argue that you bought the company specifically to have power over him? Amanda, I bought Thompson Auto Group in March, and Derek wasn't hired until June. The timeline doesn't support his conspiracy theory, and the business records will prove that the acquisition was based on financial opportunity rather than personal vendetta. That evening, as Amanda settled into the guest room that was becoming her temporary residence during the divorce proceedings, I reflected on how Derek's escalating behavior was actually providing valuable clarity about the dynamics of their marriage. Mom, Amanda called from the hallway, I want you to know that I'm grateful Derek showed his true character before we had children together. I can't imagine trying to co-parent with someone who reacts to accountability by blaming everyone else and escalating to intimidation tactics. Amanda, you're going to emerge from this situation stronger, wiser, and better equipped to recognize healthy relationship dynamics in the future. I hope so. And Mom, I want to work for Hamilton Holdings if you think I could contribute meaningfully to your business. I felt a surge of pride and excitement at Amanda's offer, recognizing that she was choosing to build her future around competence, integrity, and family relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. Amanda, I would be honored to have you join the company, but only if you're choosing that path for your own professional development, not just as a reaction to Derek's failures. I'm choosing it because I want to learn from someone I respect, work in an environment that values competence over politics, and build a career that Derek would never be able to undermine or control. Some divorces, I was learning, weren't just endings of unsuccessful marriages. They were beginnings of stronger, more authentic versions of the people who'd been diminished by manipulation and control. And some daughters discovered their own potential when they were no longer being managed by partners who preferred dependence to independence. 6 months after Derek's termination and subsequent harassment incident, Amanda and I were reviewing quarterly reports for Hamilton Holdings when Sarah knocked on my office door with news that would bring our Derek Thompson chapter to its final conclusion. Mrs. Hamilton, I have some interesting updates on Mr. Thompson's legal proceedings. His wrongful termination lawsuit has been dismissed, and there are some additional developments you should know about. Come in, Sarah. What kind of additional developments? Sarah settled into the chair across from my desk, consulting her notes with the satisfied expression of someone delivering long-awaited justice. First, Mr. Thompson's employment attorney withdrew from the case after reviewing the documentation we provided. Apparently, 6 months of performance reviews, customer complaints, and incident reports made it clear that the termination was not only justified, but probably overdue. Amanda looked up from her laptop, where she'd been analyzing market trends for our latest acquisition. Did Derek's attorney give any specific reasons for withdrawing? According to the withdrawal letter, the attorney stated that after reviewing all evidence, they could not in good conscience continue representing a client whose claims were demonstrably false and potentially frivolous. I felt a sense of professional vindication that had nothing to do with personal satisfaction and everything to do with the importance of maintaining high employment standards in our company. Sarah, what about Derek's attempts to file complaints with the Labor Board and Employment Commission? All dismissed for lack of merit. The investigators found that Thompson Auto Group maintained excellent documentation of Mr. Thompson's performance issues and followed all appropriate procedures for progressive discipline and termination. And the harassment charges Amanda and I filed? That's where it gets interesting. During the investigation of Mr. Thompson's behavior, the police discovered that he'd been engaging in similar intimidation tactics with other people who he felt had wronged him. Amanda set down her coffee cup, giving Sarah her full attention. What kind of other people? His previous employer, where he was apparently terminated for similar performance issues. A female supervisor at a job before that, who had documented his inappropriate workplace behavior. Even his apartment complex manager, who had received complaints about Mr. Thompson's aggressive responses to routine maintenance requests. I realized that Derek's escalation of inappropriate behavior represented a pattern that extended far beyond our family situation. Sarah, what does this mean legally? It means Mr. Thompson has been charged with multiple counts of harassment and stalking, and he's facing potential jail time if convicted. More importantly for our purposes, it completely undermines any credibility he might have had in claiming that his termination was retaliatory rather than performance-based. Amanda was quiet for several minutes, processing the recognition that Derek's behavior toward me and Thompson Auto Group represented just one example of a broader pattern of inability to accept accountability or handle professional criticism appropriately. Mom, I'm realizing that Derek probably would have escalated his controlling behavior in our marriage even if the job termination hadn't happened. This pattern suggests he had fundamental problems with authority and accountability that would have affected our relationship eventually. Amanda, what you're recognizing is that Derek's issues weren't specifically about me or about our family dynamics. They were about his inability to function appropriately in any situation where his behavior had consequences. Sarah continued with her updates. There's one more development that I think you'll find satisfying. Thompson Auto Group's performance has improved dramatically since Mr. Thompson's termination. Sales are up 37%. Customer satisfaction ratings have increased significantly, and several female employees have mentioned that the workplace culture is much more comfortable and professional. That confirms that Derek's impact on the company was negative in ways that extended beyond his individual performance metrics. Exactly. And Mrs. Hamilton, the other sales team members have specifically mentioned that they feel more confident approaching female customers now that they don't have to worry about Mr. Thompson undermining their professional interactions with inappropriate comments or behavior. Amanda looked at me with an expression that combined relief with sadness. Mom, Derek didn't just damage our marriage and his own career. He was actively making things worse for other people who were just trying to do their jobs professionally. Amanda, that's often how manipulative behavior works. It creates negative ripple effects that extend far beyond the primary targets of the manipulation. After Sarah left to continue coordinating Derek's legal consequences, Amanda and I spent the afternoon discussing how her first 6 months at Hamilton Holdings had exceeded both our expectations for her professional development. Amanda, your analysis of the Henderson Group acquisition was exceptional. You identified market opportunities and potential risks that I hadn't fully considered. Thank you, Mom. I'm discovering that I have business instincts that I never developed while I was married to Derek, probably because he consistently discouraged me from trusting my own judgment about complex decisions. What are you learning about yourself professionally? That I'm much more capable of strategic thinking and leadership than Derek wanted me to believe. He spent 2 years convincing me that my ideas were naive or impractical, when in reality, my instincts about business and people are pretty solid. I felt proud watching Amanda flourish in an environment that challenged her abilities rather than diminishing them, and grateful that Derek's inappropriate behavior had been stopped before it could damage more people's professional and personal lives. Amanda, I want to discuss something important with you. I've been considering expanding Hamilton Holdings into consulting services for women-owned businesses, and I'd like you to head that division if you're interested. Really? You think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility? I think you have exactly the combination of business acumen, interpersonal skills, and understanding of gender dynamics that would make you excellent at helping other women build successful enterprises. Amanda was quiet for several minutes, and I could see her processing the magnitude of what I was proposing. Not just a job opportunity, but a chance to build something meaningful that would help other women achieve professional success. Mom, I would love to head that division. And you know what? I want to specifically focus on helping women who are rebuilding their careers after leaving manipulative relationships. Women who've been convinced that they're not capable of independent success and need to rediscover their own competence and confidence. That's a brilliant focus. Amanda, you understand that demographic from personal experience, and your success in rebuilding your own life would provide credibility and inspiration for other women facing similar challenges. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Margaret, I want you to know that I've learned from my mistakes and I'm working on becoming a better person. I hope someday you and Amanda can forgive me for the damage I caused. Derek. I showed the message to Amanda, who read it with a mixture of skepticism and what might have been cautious hope. Amanda, what do you think about Derek's apology? I think it sounds more genuine than his previous attempts to manipulate the situation. But Mom, forgiveness isn't about Derek's words. It's about whether he actually changes his behavior long term. And regardless of whether Derek changes, you've already moved beyond being affected by his choices. Exactly. Derek's growth or lack of growth is his responsibility. My growth and success are mine. That evening, as Amanda and I finalized the business plan for our new women's consulting division, I reflected on how Derek's manipulation and harassment had ultimately led to opportunities and insights that neither Amanda nor I would have developed without being forced to confront his behavior directly. Amanda, what would you tell other women who are married to men like Derek but haven't recognized the manipulation patterns yet? I'd tell them to trust their instincts about family relationships and professional opportunities. If someone consistently discourages you from seeking advice from successful people, accepting help from family, or trusting your own judgment about important decisions, those are red flags that should be investigated rather than ignored. Some lessons I was learning were valuable enough to share with other women who might benefit from our experience with manipulation, accountability, and the importance of choosing relationships that enhanced rather than diminished personal and professional growth. And some daughters developed into exceptional business leaders when they were finally free to explore their potential without interference from partners who preferred dependence to independence. Tomorrow, Amanda and I would begin building something meaningful from the wreckage Derek had created through his inability to respect women or accept accountability for his own failures. 2 years after Derek's termination and the dissolution of Amanda's marriage, I stood at the podium of the Downtown Business Center's main conference hall, looking out at an audience of 300 women who had gathered for the inaugural Hamilton Holdings Women's Leadership Summit. Amanda sat in the front row, her role as Director of Women's Business Development having exceeded every expectation I'd had when we first discussed her joining the company. Ladies, when I started Hamilton Holdings 15 years ago, I never imagined that one of our most successful divisions would be built from the lessons my daughter and I learned about recognizing and recovering from manipulative relationships. I began, noting the attentive expressions of women ranging from their 20s to their 60s. But sometimes our most valuable professional insights come from our most challenging personal experiences, especially when those experiences teach us about the difference between support and control, between partnership and manipulation, between love and management. The audience included CEOs, entrepreneurs, recent graduates, and women who were rebuilding their careers after divorce or other major life transitions. Many of them had worked with Amanda's consulting division over the past 18 months, and their success stories had become the foundation for today's summit. 2 years ago, my son-in-law sent a message in our family group chat saying, "Don't come to the barbecue. I'm sure you'll just ruin the whole party anyway." My daughter and his parents liked that message, publicly endorsing his assessment that I was a party-ruining inconvenience. A murmur of recognition and sympathy rippled through the audience. Many of these women had experienced similar dismissals from family members who felt threatened by their success or independence. I responded with 2 words, understood. But what Derek Thompson didn't understand was that he just publicly humiliated his employer, because 6 months earlier, I had quietly acquired the failing automotive dealership where he worked. The audience's attention sharpened as they realized this was going to be a story about accountability rather than victimization. When Derek and Amanda came to his workplace the next morning for what he thought was a routine meeting with management, they discovered me sitting behind the CEO's desk with 6 months of documentation, showing that Derek had been failing consistently while lying to Amanda about his job performance. I paused, allowing the audience to process the implications of personal behavior intersecting with professional consequences. Derek was terminated that day, not because he'd hurt my feelings at a family barbecue, but because he demonstrated a pattern of poor performance, customer complaints, and inappropriate behavior toward women that made him unsuitable for continued employment. Amanda joined me at the podium, her confidence and poise reflecting the growth she'd experienced through rebuilding her life and career on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. 2 years ago, I was married to a man who spent our entire relationship convincing me that my mother's success was threatening, that seeking advice from accomplished people was weakness, and that trusting my own judgment about important decisions was arrogance, Amanda said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned valuable lessons through direct experience. I made excuses for Derek's behavior, rationalized his attitudes, and convinced myself that his need to be the dominant voice in our relationship was about healthy boundaries rather than control and manipulation. What I learned through Derek's professional failure and subsequent harassment was that manipulative people don't just target their romantic partners. They create problems for colleagues, customers, employers, and anyone else who expects them to be accountable for their behavior and performance. I returned to the microphone. Derek's story illustrates something crucial about workplace culture and business leadership. People who can't respect women in their personal lives typically can't respect women in professional settings either. Their attitudes create toxic environments that damage team morale, customer relationships, and company reputation. That's why Amanda's division focuses specifically on helping women recognize and address these patterns, both in their personal relationships and their professional environments. Amanda stepped forward again. Our consulting services have helped over 150 women in the past 18 months, but we've also worked with corporations to identify and eliminate workplace cultures that tolerate disrespectful behavior toward women in leadership positions. Because what we learned through my personal experience is that Derek's attitudes weren't unique. They were representative of broader cultural assumptions about female authority and competence that affect businesses, families, and communities. Dr. Patricia Williams, a workplace psychology expert who'd partnered with Amanda's division, joined us at the podium to present research findings from companies that had implemented our recommended policy changes. Organizations that adopted Hamilton Holdings' recommendations for identifying and addressing gender-based workplace disrespect reported average increases of 42% in female employee retention, 37% improvement in customer satisfaction ratings from female clients, and 28% increases in overall team productivity. These improvements weren't achieved through complex diversity initiatives or expensive training programs. They were achieved by establishing clear consequences for behavior that undermines professional respect and by creating environments where competence and character determine advancement rather than gender or family connections. During the afternoon workshop sessions, I had the opportunity to speak with individual attendees about their experiences with manipulation in both personal and professional contexts. The stories were remarkably consistent. Women who'd been convinced that their instincts were unreliable, their ambitions were inappropriate, and their successes were threatening to the men in their lives. "Mrs. Hamilton," said Jennifer Torres, a 34-year-old marketing executive, "your story helped me recognize that my ex-husband's constant criticism of my career achievements wasn't about our relationship. It was about his insecurity about my independence. I've been promoted twice since our divorce. What changed in your approach to work after the divorce?" I stopped second-guessing my professional instincts and seeking permission for decisions I was qualified to make independently. My ex-husband had convinced me that assertiveness in women was off-putting, but my colleagues and clients actually respect direct communication and confident decision-making. Similar conversations happened throughout the day, with women sharing stories of professional growth that had accelerated once they were no longer being managed by partners who preferred dependence to independence. During the closing session, Amanda presented our expansion plans for the next 2 years. Hamilton Holdings Women's Business Development Division will be opening offices in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Nashville, providing consulting services and business development resources to women throughout the Southeast, Amanda announced to enthusiastic applause. We'll also be launching a mentorship program that connects successful women entrepreneurs with those who are rebuilding their careers after major life transitions, particularly divorce from manipulative relationships. Because what we've learned is that personal growth and professional success are deeply connected, and women who learn to recognize manipulation in one area of their lives become more effective at creating healthy boundaries in all areas of their lives. As the summit concluded and attendees networked over dinner, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought Amanda and me to this point. Derek's manipulation and harassment had been painful and disruptive, but they had also revealed strengths and opportunities that might never have been developed under more comfortable circumstances. "Mom," Amanda said, joining me on the conference center's outdoor terrace where I'd stepped away from the networking dinner, "I received an interesting email today. Derek's gotten engaged to someone named Lisa, and she apparently contacted me through LinkedIn asking about what it was really like being married to Derek. What did you tell her?" I told her that Derek had fundamental issues with respecting women's independence and competence, that he'd systematically undermined my relationship with family members who supported my career, and that he'd been terminated from his job for inappropriate behavior toward female colleagues and customers. How did she respond? She thanked me for my honesty and said she'd been noticing concerning patterns in Derek's behavior, but had been convinced by him that his previous relationships had failed because the women were too influenced by feminist ideas about independence. I felt a mixture of sadness for Derek's apparent inability to change and hope that his new girlfriend would have the wisdom to protect herself from manipulation that Amanda had learned to recognize and reject. Amanda, what do you think about Derek's engagement? I think it confirms that Derek hasn't learned to address the character issues that destroyed our marriage and his professional reputation. But I also think that's no longer my concern or responsibility. As we drove home from the summit, Amanda asked the question that had been building throughout the day's presentations and conversations. "Mom, do you think we would have developed this consulting division if Derek hadn't behaved so inappropriately? Would we have discovered these insights about manipulation and business culture without going through that experience ourselves? I think we would have been successful in different ways. But Amanda, experiencing Derek's manipulation and learning to overcome it gave us credibility and insight that women facing similar challenges can trust and relate to. So in a strange way, Derek's worst behavior led to our best professional opportunities? Derek's worst behavior led to our clearest understanding of our own strengths and our strongest commitment to helping other women develop similar strength and clarity. My son-in-law thought that humiliating a mother-in-law would be without consequences. He discovered that some mothers-in-law are CEOs who don't tolerate employees who disrespect women, especially when those women are themselves. But more importantly, he taught my daughter and me that our greatest professional purposes could be built from our most difficult personal experiences, as long as we chose growth over victimization and service over resentment. As Amanda and I planned the next phase of our business expansion, I realized that some betrayals became the foundations for enterprises larger and more meaningful than the people who'd committed them ever imagined possible. Some daughters discovered their greatest potential when they were finally free from partners who preferred management to partnership. And some mothers-in-law learned that the most satisfying revenge was building something valuable from the wreckage that manipulative people created when they underestimated the women they tried to control. Derek Thompson had intended to diminish me. Instead, he had accidentally inspired Amanda and me to create resources that would protect and empower hundreds of other women from men exactly like him. The end.
하루는 있는데 원래 제가 오면 추석 같은 때 오잖아요. 그럼 저 솔방울들이 막 있거든. 나무에서 떨어져 소나무 솔방울 주워다가 이렇게 불을 피우고 그랬어요. 근데 지금 사람들도 많아서 불 피우면 안 되고, 특히 산불 바람 센데 큰일 난다고 막 뉴스에 나오는데 불 피우면 안 되겠지만 화로가 있어요. 거기다 피우면 괜찮잖아. 근데 이미 다 저런 솔방울들이 젖었을 거란 말이야. 여기 호우주의보라고? 진짜로 뻥으로 농담으로. 아, 나 핸드폰 어디 갔지? 아, 저기 안에 있네. 누가 날씨 좀 봐줘. 어? 날씨 좀 봐줘. 날씨 안 봐줘? 저 안개가 점점 계속 몰려들면서 저 앞에 시야가 점점 안 보이는데 어떻게 하지?